Hello, my loves. I'm Leah Stewart, writer and storyteller here at Real Love Stories. And before we start today's story, I want to ask you something. What if the person you've loved in secret for years loves you back, and you only find out after you've already decided to walk away? Imagine carrying that feeling quietly for 3 whole years, certain it could never be returned, and then making the hardest choice of your life, to leave, to step away from the one person who has your heart without even knowing it. But fate has its own timing, and on one ordinary evening, everything hidden has a way of surfacing. The person you were sure would never feel the same turns out to have been feeling it all along, just too afraid to say so. Now that the truth is finally out, is there still time, or has too much already been left unsaid for too long? I spent 2 weeks completely wrapped up in this one, and I hope it makes you sigh the way it made me sigh while writing it. If you enjoy it, drop a like and tell me in the comments what this story made you feel. Get cozy, here we go. Have you ever watched someone walk away and known, deep in your chest, that you were making a mistake you might never get to fix? That's what August felt, standing on the porch of a farmhouse that smelled like wet wood and lavender, watching Hazel smile at him with her arms crossed against the evening chill. It was the kind of smile he had memorized over 3 years without ever realizing he was memorizing it. He should have told her what her resignation had cracked open inside him. But August Martin had built a career on knowing exactly what to say in any room, and tonight, when it mattered most, every word turned to dust. So instead, he hugged her, the way you hold something precious right after you realize it's been precious all along. For one fleeting moment, she let her head rest against his shoulder. He kissed her forehead, a second too long for it to mean nothing, and a second too short for it to mean everything he wanted it to. See you, Hazel. Call me if you need anything. 4 words meant to sound casual that came out like a prayer. Hazel watched him walk to his car, gripping the porch railing until her knuckles went pale. Anyone watching would have seen it instantly. Two people clearly, obviously in love, neither one brave enough to say so. As August drove, his mind kept circling back to that porch, to her resignation letter on his desk, to a notebook he'd found between financial reports, with words she never meant for him to read, about feelings for someone who would never look at her that way. He did look at her that way. He'd been looking at her that way for far longer than he was willing to admit, burying it under schedules and meetings and the comfortable lie that what he felt was simple professional appreciation. He reached for his phone, thinking he could call her right now, and just say it. That's the moment everything changed. A shape appeared on the road, a horse standing perfectly still. August swerved, the wheels lost their grip on the wet pavement, and the car slid off the shoulder. There was a jolt, a crunch of metal, and then stillness. Dazed, he reached for his phone where it had landed on the floor, Hazel's name glowing on the screen, but everything felt slow and far away, and the last thing on his mind before the world went dark was her face. Back at the farmhouse, Hazel stood watching the empty road, a feeling settling into her chest she couldn't explain. She called him. It rang and rang. Now, I know what you're thinking, just another almost confession and a sudden accident. But to understand how August ended up on that road, we need to rewind a few days, to a Tuesday night when Hazel walked into his office with a cup of coffee and a secret she'd carried for far too long. It was just past 10:30, and the office of Martin and Associates was completely still except for one lit window, his. Hazel stood in the doorway with a mug of coffee she had no real reason to be making this late, except the ritual had become a habit over 3 years. Extra hot, 2 spoonfuls of sugar, a pinch of cinnamon, because she'd once noticed he stirred cinnamon into his own coffee when he thought no one was watching, and never told him she'd noticed. August sat behind his desk, tired in a way no amount of sleep could fix. He hadn't noticed her come in. 3 years she'd been watching this man, learning him the way you learn a language you'll never speak out loud. She set the mug down, and the small clink pulled him out of his thoughts. His eyes moved from the coffee to her face, and this time he actually saw her. "You're still here," he said quietly. "I'm always here, August," she answered, the words slipping out before she could catch them, painfully true. He gestured to the chair across from him, not an order, an invitation. They talked the way people talk late at night when the masks have slipped. "Sometimes I feel like I'm building a sandcastle," he said, turning his mug between his palms. "You spend hours getting every detail right, and it only takes one wave and it's just sand again." She wanted to tell him that the care he poured into it was the point, but saying that would mean crossing a line she'd drawn around herself years ago to protect her heart. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Hazel," he said simply. "You're the only constant I have." Her throat tightened, because tomorrow she was going to take that constant away, and she couldn't tell him why. "August," she started, the word heavier than she meant it. He looked at her, waiting. She could tell him everything right now. But the words died somewhere between her heart and her tongue. She stood stead. "I need to talk to you tomorrow. Something important." As she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Hazel, thank you for always staying here with me, even when I don't deserve it." Something cracked quietly in her chest, because he had no idea she'd fallen in love with a man who saw her as his right hand, his constant, everything except what she actually was. "You're welcome, August," and walked out, making herself a quiet promise. This was the last time she'd stay late for him. The next morning, August was mid-call about contract terms when Hazel walked in. He held up a finger, not really looking at her, and she waited until she finally spoke over him. "August, I am resigning." The silence landed instantly, like diving into cold water. He hung up, saying he'd call back. "You're what?" She placed a letter on his desk, signed and entirely real. "I'll through the week. After that, I'm going back to my grandparents' farm. They need help, and I need a change." He tried every angle, more money, less workload, a different role, but she shook her head at all of it. "Then why?" he finally asked, his voice rising. "'Cause I have to," she said softly. "I hope you can understand." For the first time in his career, August had no plan, just a quiet panic. When she left, he sat there holding her letter, realizing he'd never let himself really think about what Hazel meant to him, and the answer terrified him. A few nights later, alone in the office, he found a small notebook on her desk, and tucked between grocery lists and reminders were folded notes that weren't meant for anyone's eyes. "I'm an idiot," one read. "How did I let myself develop feelings for someone who will never look at me that way?" Another, "I've decided I'm leaving. It's only way. I'd rather leave with my dignity." August sat with that for a long time. To be him. He thought back through 3 years of small things he'd told himself were simple loyalty, the relief he felt every morning when she was already at her desk, the quiet loneliness of his evenings after she went home. He typed a message, "Hazel, can we talk tomorrow? It's important," then deleted it because what would he even say? He put the notebook back and knew there was no real point, because the words were already somewhere inside him he couldn't undo. On her last day, after a small farewell gathering, August found he couldn't write anything in her goodbye card, every option feeling like a lie or wildly insufficient, so he wrote nothing at all. By 6, it was just the two of them, the sky outside gone gray and heavy. "It's starting to rain hard," he said. "Let me drive you home. I'm headed straight to my grandparents' farm. Then I'll take you there." The drive stretched an hour through the rain, small talk about traffic until he asked about the farm, and she lit up describing her grandfather still fixing the tractor himself at 83, her grandmother's pecan pie, the quiet home she was going back to. By the time they reached the porch, the rain had softened, and August hugged her the way you hold on to something essential right before you have to let it go. He kissed her forehead and told her to call if she needed anything, not knowing his night was about to take a turn neither of them could have predicted. At 2 in the morning, Hazel's phone rang. It was the hospital. August had swerved to avoid a horse on the dark, wet road and had been brought in with injuries serious enough that doctors wanted to keep him lightly sedated for a few days while his body and head recovered from the impact. Hazel arrived still in her pajamas, her grandmother driving because her own hands were shaking too badly. The doctor, a steady man named Dr. Alvarena, explained August had fractured ribs and a concussion with swelling that needed time to settle, and that they expected a full recovery, but it would take patience and some support once he was released. "Can I see him?" she asked. In. She pulled a chair beside the bed and took his hand, surprised by how warm it still was. She'd leave. For days she came every morning and stayed until visiting hours ended, talking to him about small, ordinary things. On the 4th day she leaned close and whispered, "You need to wake up, August, because I have something to tell you." On the 5th day his sedation was eased and slowly he began to surface. His fingers twitched against hers one afternoon, and a day later his eyes opened, searching the room until they landed on her. The first word out of his mouth, rough and barely audible, was her name. The doctors confirmed he'd be fine, though recovery would take weeks of rest, therapy, and care. His parents were traveling and would take time to get back, and his only nearby relative, an uncle named Roderick, showed up just long enough to sign paperwork and arrange a recovery facility, which struck Hazel as cold the moment she heard it. She thought of August, who hated even routine checkups, spending weeks somewhere unfamiliar surrounded by strangers, and made up her mind in 3 seconds. "He's not going to a facility," she told the doctor. "I'll take care of him at my grandparents' farm." The doctor studied her, asked about medical background, and when she mentioned her grandmother had spent decades as a nurse, agreed to support the plan, as long as August agreed too. August arrived at the farm that Saturday, hating every second of needing help, hating how weak he felt in front of her. She gave him space instead of hovering, brought him meals, managed his routine, and slowly he started coming back to himself. By the 3rd week he could sit up without the room spinning. One morning over breakfast, fresh bread, weak coffee, juice in a chipped glass, he said quietly, "You don't have to do this." "I know," she said. "But Grandma made this bread at 5 because she heard you liked it yesterday, and if I don't bring it, she'll march in here herself with soup. So really, I'm doing you a favor." The corner of his mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him in weeks. "Hazel," he said after a while, "why are you still here? You had a whole plan, a fresh start, and then I show up needing help with everything." "You didn't ruin anything, August," she said. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked, meaning it. "No," he said too fast, surprising even himself. "I just don't understand why you stayed." She looked out at the horses grazing in the pasture. "When I got that call, for about 40 seconds, I thought you might be gone. And in those 40 seconds, every reason I'd built for leaving disappeared, like it never existed. I realized the moment someone told me you were hurt, I'd drop everything and come running. That's just what you do when you care about someone in a way that doesn't follow logic." The room went quiet, and when she stood to gather the tray, his voice stopped her once more. "Thank you," he said, "for not letting me wake up alone." She didn't turn around because if she had, he'd have seen that her eyes were wet. Weeks passed. One evening, while Hazel changed the dressing on his healing ribs, a routine she'd turned into a careful habit, just to keep her hands from shaking, August stopped her gently. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me say it before you react." He told her about the night he'd found her notebook, about reading words she never meant for anyone to see. The color from her face. "You read them." "I read them," he admitted, holding her gaze. "Was it about me?" he asked, quieter now. She had no lies left. Yes. "It was about you." He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers carefully. "I owe you an honesty that's 3 years overdue," he said. "I didn't know exactly what you'd written, but I felt something was there, in the way you looked at me when you thought I wasn't paying attention. And I buried it under every name except the real one, because admitting it meant risking the one part of my life that actually worked, and I was too much of a coward." His forehead came to rest against hers. "I love you, Hazel. Not because you took care of me, though I'm grateful for that. I love you because of that night you brought me coffee at 11 and listened to me talk about sandcastles like it actually mattered. Because you remembered Clara's birthday every year. Because you made me feel, for the first time in my adult life, like I wasn't building something completely alone." Hazel kissed him then, the kind of kiss that happens when 3 years of silence finally break open. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Not as someone who looked after me. Stay as the person I don't want to spend another day without." She rested her forehead against his and nodded, a small, certain motion that said everything words couldn't. 3 months after the accident, August stood on the porch one evening, mostly recovered, but carrying the guilt of knowing his company couldn't wait forever while he healed. "You're thinking about going back, aren't you?" Hazel asked, bringing out 2 mugs of coffee. "The doctor cleared me yesterday." 2 weeks later he was back at his apartment in the city, and they settled into a new rhythm, weekdays apart, always leaving by 6 though, and weekends together at the farm. It was good, almost entirely good, except for something Hazel had started keeping quiet about. One Friday, August arrived early and found her on the porch, holding an envelope she tried, too quickly, to hide. It was a job offer in another state, far better pay, 8 hours away. "Are you going to take it?" he asked. "No," she said immediately. "My life is here." But that night, lying awake, He couldn't shake the worry that he was the reason she was turning down something good, the same way he'd once, without meaning to, kept her tied to a desk for 3 years. A few days later, his uncle Roderick showed up at the farm unannounced, accompanied by a Dr. Hazel didn't recognize. Roderick had never approved of August's recovery happening here, and brought along paperwork meant to plant doubt, suggesting that what August felt for Hazel might be nothing more than a side effect of gratitude rather than something real. Hazel listened, unsettled, and though something about the visit didn't sit right with her, the seed of doubt had already been planted. She spent the next several nights unable to sleep, reading about recovery and emotional attachment, and the more she read, the more she second-guessed everything, wondering if his feelings for her had only ever shown up after she'd become the person taking care of him. That Friday, August arrived with concert tickets for the two of them, clearly already imagining a future together, and Hazel, heart in her throat, told him instead she was thinking of taking the job after all. "I thought we were fine," he said, stunned. "We were living in a kind of fantasy," she said, the words slipping out faster than she meant. "You're back at your real life now, and I think I need to get back to mine." He reached for her hand and she pulled away. "Look me in the eyes," he said quietly, "and tell me you don't love me." She couldn't say it, so instead she said something safer and so much worse. "It doesn't matter if I love you. What matters is whether this is right, and I don't think it is." He left without another word, and Hazel collapsed onto the porch steps the moment his car disappeared, her grandmother coming out to hold her while she cried. 3 days later, Dr. Alvarena stopped by August's apartment, concerned after several unanswered calls, and found him quiet and withdrawn. "She's gone," August said simply. "She said we'd confused gratitude for love." The doctor sat with him, and piece by piece the truth came out. Roderick had arranged that visit, using a doctor with no real involvement in August's case, to convince Hazel that August's feelings weren't trustworthy, all so he could push her out of the picture for reasons that had nothing to do with August's well-being. August felt the anger rise fast and clean. He called his directly, her. "You lied to her about my condition." Roderick, unbothered, said only that he'd been protecting August from a poor decision. August hung up and looked at the clock. Hazel had said she was leaving on Friday. Today. He grabbed his keys. "I'm coming with you," Dr. Alvarena said. "Tell me her address on the way." A quick call to her grandmother confirmed it. Hazel had already left for the airport, flight at 8:30, gate 23. August had less than an hour to reach her. The airport, and crowded. Hazel stood near her gate, boarding pass in hand, telling herself this was the right thing. The thing that would let August live without the weight of feelings he hadn't really chosen. She almost believed it. Then, her name. She turned, and there he was, breathless, having talked his way past security with nothing but urgency. "I know what my uncle did," he said, still catching his breath. "I know what he told you." "None of it was true, Hazel. There's nothing wrong, my judgment. He made it up because he wanted you gone, and he knew the only way was to convince you I didn't mean what I said." A tear slipped down her cheek. He stepped closer, his hands rising slowly to cup her face, giving her every chance to pull away. "She didn't. I love you," he said, the words unpolished and a little shaky. "Not because you took care of me. Because you're the woman who noticed I liked cinnamon in my coffee and never mentioned it. Because you remembered Clara's birthday every year. Because you sat with me at 11 at night and made me feel like what I was saying mattered. I wasted 3 years too afraid to close the distance between us, and then you resigned, and I found your notebook, and everything cracked open, and I still did nothing. And then there was an accident, and the only thought I had before everything went dark was that I'd run out of time to tell you." He rested his forehead against hers. "I'm not here to stop you from doing what's right for you. I'm here because you deserve the truth before you decide anything. I lied. And I loved you before any of this happened. The accident didn't create what I feel for you, it just took away every excuse I had left for ignoring it." The gate agent's voice crackled overhead, calling final boarding. Hazel looked toward the thinning line, then back at August, and something in his face, steady and certain, made the doubt finally loosen its grip. "What if he was right about one thing?" she said softly. "Then explain the notebook," he said. "Explain why I couldn't sleep the night I read it. Explain why I drove an hour through the rain to take you home. Why I kissed your forehead on that porch. and spent the whole drive trying to find the courage to turn around. She looked at the boarding pass in her hand and folded it quietly in half. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have for a long time. I was leaving because somebody convinced me what you felt wasn't real. But it is. I should have seen that before I ever got on this line." August let out a long breath, like he'd been holding the whole world together and could finally set it down. He kissed her, slow and certain this time. When they parted, his eyes were wet, but he was smiling openly, in a way she'd never once seen in 3 years of conference rooms and quiet evenings. "Let's go home," she whispered. He picked up her suitcase with one hand and laced his fingers through hers with the other, and together they walked back through the terminal, leaving an empty seat behind on a flight that would take off without either of them. Outside, the night air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. Dr. Alvarino was leaning against the car, and when he saw them walking out hand in hand, he gave a small, knowing nod and said nothing at all. August opened the passenger door for her, loaded her suitcase, and paused for just a second to look back at the terminal, at planes lifting off toward cities full of beginnings that, this time, neither of them needed. Then he looked at Hazel through the windshield, and she was already smiling at him, a real one, the kind that starts somewhere deep in the chest and slowly warms everything on its way up. "Ready?" he asked. "I've been ready for a long time, August," she said. He pulled out onto the highway, the road stretching ahead toward the countryside, toward the porch with the rocking chairs, toward crickets and lavender, and a grandmother who'd have bread waiting, toward home. And this time, neither of them was leaving.